Welcome to Caldwell County Today. I'm Paige Counts, Public Information Officer for Caldwell County. Joining me today is Seth Nagy from Cooperative Extension and Sarah Christas with Cooperative Extension, and we are here to talk about fire ants. So, okay, how did fire ants get here?
Well, the old tale goes they were accidentally imported here back in, I think it was 1930 in Alabama. And so they've been slowly migrating north ever since then.
And this year is supposed to be particularly bad for fire ants. What causes that? Why is that the case?
Well, what's happening is that fire ants have naturally migrated from Alabama and also the eastern coast of North Carolina. They're native to South America. So they've been slowly migrating, and although they migrate themselves, they'll in fact, we may even see some of these mounds today where there's some holes in the top, and they'll swarm, they'll grow wings, and they'll fly a little bit. But actually, people are better movers of fire ants than fire ants are movers of themselves. So we move the stuff in a lot of different ways. So the reason that fire ants are going to be bad this year is because they have made it to Catawba County and Burke County, and obviously those are two neighbors of ours in Caldwell County. So the reason that we're going to have a big problem with fire ants this year is just because they're next door, and we're not that far away, unfortunately, from Burke County and Catawba County. That's why they're going to be bad.
So why are fire ants problematic?
They don't play nice when you invade their space, meaning they will bite, and sometimes that can cause, if you're allergic to them, you can go into what they call anaphylactic shock. So it is a problem for humans and animals because they do bite, and it hurts.
Yeah. So they actually build galleries and stuff in there. But it's so this whole thing, their mound isn't just, it's a bunch of little rooms, and it goes about 2 feet in the ground or so, and usually the queen is at the very bottom. But this is a fire ant mound, and those are red imported fire ants. Even though they look kind of black, they don't necessarily have to be red, but that's what they are. You can see they're moving their little brood around. And when the fire ants actually go get something, when they bring food back, they actually bring it back and they feed it to the brood. The brood's the only thing that can eat solid food. Then once the brood kind of digest it, they kind of have this sort of like an open pit where they digest everything. Then all the ants feed each other through a process called trophylactics, where they get a little bit of liquid food and they feed it to each other. Just like some folks are allergic to bee stings, Sarah mentioned it. Some folks, if you're allergic to bee stings, you might be allergic to fire ants. There's really some formic acid in there, and there's some proteins and amino acids that are also mixed in that we can be allergic to. So it might have looked a little scary because I was in there amongst the fire ants, but I I used a little trick. I guessed that it was in the 50s, the fire ants actually mutated. It's a single gene mutation. But what happened is the fire ants that originally were imported from South America, they were what they call a single queen colony. So in other words, this fire ant mound would be enemies with any other fire ant mound, and they would fight. When they tried to do that big eradication, it put some pressure, and there's some reasons why, but it brought out a gene where there's multi-queen colony fire ants. So what happens is this fire ant mound will get along with other fire ants. And those fire ants are what we see a lot of in this area. You'll see a lot more mounds per acre. So rather than like 25 mounds to the acre, you'll see up to 100 or more. They're a little less aggressive, but once they do start biting, they're a little less aggressive to start with. So I believe these are this multi-queen kind of fire ants, and that's another reason to use the bait, because if we were to pour insecticide on that mound, the ants that we didn't kill would just go to another mound and they'd be taken in. So it's a little depressing. I had hoped that I'd never deal with fire ants. In Caldwell County, I dealt with them when I lived in South Carolina.
But here we are.
Here we are, in an undisclosed location in Caldwell County.
Sarah, talk us through how you make the decision to put out the bait.
Yeah, so there's a really awesome tool out there, and it's on our Caldwell Extension website, and you'll probably see it pop up here in a second. But there's a decision-making tool to use, whether it's for your individual household or if maybe you are over like the maintenance at a school or somewhere public. But usually, y'all, if it's a high-trafficked area and you see a lot of mounds, it makes sense to put out bait because you're controlling. That'll be an easy way to control a lot at once. But if you're, maybe in the residential setting, or you only see a few mounds out there, mound drenching is pretty effective. That's the quickest results you'll get. But again, if it's a high trafficked area, there's too many to control, bait's your best bet. It's still going to work. It just takes, a week or two to really start seeing results. So that's just something to keep in mind. All right, y'all, so we are going to treat this mound with some bait. And keep in mind, when you choose bait, it's because they're actively foraging, and that's how we knew, is because if you put out a potato chip beside the mound and they're congregating towards it, they're out foraging. So what you want to do first is to make sure you have closed-toed shoes, you have gloves on, and long sleeves. And where did I find this information? It's on the label. So always read the label before you use any type of pesticide, because the label is the law. So as the label states, I'm going to take a tablespoon, and we've labeled this spoon pesticide only, just in case somebody were to get hungry for yogurt later. They know not to use this spoon. And it's 2 tablespoons per mound. So what I'm going to do is take these 2 tablespoons and kind of put it in a circle around the mound, and I'll be a few inches out from the mound, because again, they're going to forage for this. So the ants are going to come out from under the mound and take this bait back to the brood, and they'll eat it, and hopefully they'll all die in about 5 to 7 days, maybe a couple weeks depending. But this is how you'll bait treat a mound.
So like we'd mentioned earlier, Extinguish Plus would be one of the examples you could use in the landscape. Extinguish is labeled in food producing areas, which would be a pasture or a hayfield or a row crop area. What you can actually do, there's been some neat, Texas has been dealing with these things a lot longer than North Carolina. And what they've found is that if you spread this stuff in a 30-foot swath and skip 30 feet and then spread 30 feet, so you can do that. It's called the skip swath method. Very descriptive. That actually works just as good as if you spread a full rate, which is 1.5 pounds per acre. So half rate would be 3/4 of a pound per acre, and you just stripe it with this 30-foot path. And that works really well in pastures, hay fields, and row crop. And the reason is because these guys actually go out and forage. So if you put the stuff out at the right time, it'll work, and you'll have 90+% control is kind of the goal. That's something good. You can imagine it takes a special spreader to put out that low rate. So we can look at that.
Okay.
So Paige, this is a spreader that would work for pastures and row crop areas. It's kind of a special. This spreader was actually developed for clover seed, where you might put out just a couple pounds per acre, but it also works really, really well for fire ant bait. It's got a little metering mechanism, and in fact there's even a little plate. It's got a 1/2-inch hole in it, And on the manufacturers usually tell you which plate to use and how fast you can go. So a 1/2 inch hole going 5 miles an hour, spreading 30 feet, and that's what this will do. It's already pre-calibrated and it's ready to go, and you just drive and then move over 60 feet and then come back the other way, and so you can go ahead and treat. And this makes it easy. This actually goes on a receiver hitch, as you can tell, and although I don't think Eric can see it, there's some wires back here that hook up to a 12-volt battery. So this can go on your ATV, your UTV, your 4-wheeler, your 3-wheeler, if anybody still has any of those. You could put it on the back of your tractor. I use, oh my gosh, that's heavy. I use this thing. So that way it hooks up to the 3-point hitch, and then I can put it in and plug it into my battery, and so it works with the tractor. So this is kind of a nice piece of equipment, and it's designed specifically for putting out fire ant bait.
Where does one find one of these spreaders?
Farm supply stores. That would be where I would look. I actually haven't checked Tractor Supply, but this is the herd spreader. Now there are others out there that'll do it as well. This is just one example of one brand. But if you do buy something specific for fire ants, realize that you're putting out just a little bit per acre, so that you don't need you're not putting out fertilizer or something like that where it's a whole lot.
This is not a case where more is better.
This is a case where the label says apply 1.5 pounds per acre, and if you go over that, it's a violation of the law, of the label. It's putting out more than you're supposed to, and it's costing you more. So most people, if it hurts their pocketbook, they're usually pretty happy to adjust. And the manufacturer also, if 1.5 pounds per acre didn't work, then they'd tell you to put out more, because they're selling the product, they want it to work, and you're exactly right. More is not going to kill fire ants better. What you do need to remember is that when you put your potato chip out, or you can use a hot dog or something, piece of bologna, if they don't cover that thing up in about 20 or 30 minutes, they're not actively foraging, and don't make an application.
Okay. Thank you, Seth.
Just a couple things to keep in mind. If you do find fire ant mounds and you're trying to treat, as much as you want to, don't go over and kick the mound or disturb the mound, because then they're going to be focusing on rebuilding that mound, and they're not going to forage for the bait that you're just trying to put out. So just keep that in mind. Don't disturb it. Just treat it and move on.
All right. Thank you, Sarah, Seth. Thank you for coming to this location, helping us to treat some fire ants today. I really appreciate it.
Well, I hope this helps the citizens. Certainly if they have any questions or have some situation that we didn't cover, I certainly encourage them to call the Caldwell Extension Center at the numbers at the bottom, of course, but just have them give us a call, and whether it's Sarah or myself or Alan, we can certainly give some specific advice for their situation.
Thank you both, and thank you for watching Caldwell County Today.